is using his voice to change the criminal justice system.
I've been on probation since the age of 18. I'm 31 years old.
He became a national symbol for reform after a judge sentenced him in 2017 to serve prison time for a minor probation violation. It was related to a decade-old gun and drug possession conviction. After public protests and legal appeals, he was released after 5 months. But his legal journey didn't end there.
Every time I started to further my life, every year or two, it was something that always brought me back to ground zero, and it was probation. And I always wondered what happened to the people that was in situations worse than mine. I'm here to speak for the people who don't have a voice.
He and Jay-Z are joining forces with the owners of major sports teams, pledging $50 million to create the Reform Alliance.
I'm from RC Projects. I'm from Brooklyn, and this has been a part of my life. You know, if someone commits a crime, they should go to jail. But these things are just disproportionate, and the whole world knows it.
This problem is so much bigger than Meek that fundamentally our criminal justice system is just broken. People always say to me how lucky Meek is to have me as his friend. I look at it exactly the opposite. I couldn't feel more fortunate to have Meek as one of my closest friends because he's taught me so much about a world I didn't understand at all.
I'd never been to jail before, and going there and seeing him, I didn't sleep the rest of the night. We can make America better if we really cure this problem.
The Alliance says millions of people are on parole, trapped by harsh sentences for minor violations, like the one that sent Mill to prison.
Welcome to another edition of Confidently Speaking with DOC. I am your host, David Doc Shirey, author of the book, Rare Confidence, Strategies and Inspiration to Strengthen Your Belief that You Can Achieve Anything. Episode number 16 on tap tonight, and we are talking criminal justice reform with a well-respected and very passionate attorney who is committed to making the world a better place. As always, a couple reminders. This show was designed to be participatory. I just love saying that word. I'm going to have to come up with a new one next show. But please comment, ask questions. We'll try to get a bunch of those on the air tonight. And if you could share this video, that would be awesome. That would allow the reach of the show to keep getting bigger, and we can keep bringing on big guests, some of the national variety. So without further ado, let's meet tonight's guest. Bill Caye founded the professional law and consulting firm William F. Caye II LLC. Bill serves on the board of governors at Duquesne University's Law Alumni Association and was a former appointed senior deputy attorney general and assistant district attorney, respectively, tasked with prosecuting major felony crimes. Bill has received several prestigious public awards and is the acting president of the Sarah Club of the Pittsburgh Diocese and is on the executive board of the Western chapter of the Pennsylvania Sports Hall of Fame. Bill graduated magna cum laude with a BA from Duquesne University and a JD from the Duquesne University School of Law. Bill is married with 2 teenage boys. I am thrilled to welcome Bill Caye to the program. How we doing, Bill?
Good seeing you, Doc. Thanks for having me on.
Thanks for being on. I really appreciate it. You know, when you and I first started talking about this criminal justice reform, I mean, this is so current right now with all that's going on in our world, Bill. And I guess let's just jump right into it because I have 2 questions for you. First and foremost, from a 30,000-foot view, tell us what criminal justice reform is, and then tell us how you became such an advocate for it.
Well, I think you have to look at problems from the front end and the back end. So from that bird's eye view, criminal justice reform isn't really reform unless it addresses both the front end and the back end. I got involved passionately through mentoring some young law students and former individuals that had found themselves in the criminal justice system. They were afforded a second opportunity through my representation. I'm proud to say that in some instances, they've been accepted to law schools, or they're founding their own businesses where they're trying to do what they can to address some of these societal problems.
Bill, the state of New York has eliminated a few exceptions for like murder and rape, and pollute you with meaning that criminals will be beholden in their beliefs that they're going to get out quickly. And then the flip side to that argument is that one's financial situation should never eat them. Why is bail reform a good idea? And if you could look into your crystal ball, what will the results of this specific law be a few years down the road?
Well, bail reform is critical because that's the initial intake and entry into the point of the criminal justice system. And what's happening is that primarily a lot of our jurists, our judges, our magisterial district court judges have relied on pretty much one tool in that entirety of a toolbox, namely cash bail. And that may not be the best mechanism based upon our research, based upon case history and analytics, that in many instances, we don't need to have that form of a surety that a person that is caught initially in the system needs to have a set cash bail in order to require their appearance. If they have representation, if they have ties to the community, if they have a business or family, if they are not necessarily in the point where they can flee the jurisdiction, I mean, all of those factors should play into somebody just being released on their own promise to appear in front of the court when it's time for the next step in the process.
Bill, many states have legislation pending to promote this Clean Slate Act. They call it different things in different states. Picture him of Rogsburg King, and she's holding a letter from the state of Connecticut, which is changing her record on stations have signed when she jobs. And some would say that, you know, that's what she gets for perpetrating those crimes. Others believe that in America, everybody deserves a second chance, or in this case, a seventh chance. What are your thoughts on a clean slate type act?
Well, in Pennsylvania, we've started to implement those types of back-end reforms in the nature of when there are nonviolent offenses and a sufficient amount of law-abiding time since the disposition of that prior adjudicated or conviction occurs, then you're allowed to, in some instances, petition the court to either seal the record, which would then clean that slate, or to expunge the record, which again would clean the slate, or in some instances where the crimes are a little bit more serious, sort of above a felony level, felony 2, felony 1, then you need to have a gubernatorial or a governor perform an executive process in an administrative setting where then they grant a pardon. So those are some of the ways that individuals that have accepted responsibility or were found guilty can still then get a second chance to move beyond once they've paid their debt back to society. So those are the things that second chances afford individuals. And I've represented several clients that, because they got a pardon, are now able to enter the productive measure of the community and give back because they want to. Believe me, people don't always commit crimes because they're bad people. They make mistakes sometimes. There's sets of circumstances. There's a lot of stress on people right now with COVID-19. I mean, that could be an underlying mechanism. Mental health. Sometimes the individual, when they're very young, their brain's not developed. They cannot process decision making. So when people advance in age and become more mature, their decision making is going to improve. So it would make sense not to hold that person accountable and have a lifetime of a sentence because they made a mistake when they were in their teenage years.
It seems to me, Bill, that a lot of folks like you and that are pushing for these types of reforms, that compassion is a big part of it. Would you agree with that statement?
Compassion, being holistic, thinking outside the box, looking at the big picture, coming at it from life's experience, and putting things in perspective. The segue that you led into this show with Meek Mill is one example of how when someone gets caught up and they may not be able to pay financially their debt to society, whether it's significant court costs, assessment fees, supervision fees, cat fund fees. I mean, it's like a nickel and dime rat race. And even a person that has a modest job, many of our people today don't even make $15 an hour. Well, how are they going to pay back court costs when they're assessed in the thousands? It makes no sense.
Bill, 91% of people in America agree that the system has issues that need to be addressed. And another stat I saw that was crazy was that 46% of our prisoners in state lockups are non-violent offenders. Now, last year, something really remarkable happened in Washington, D.C. The First Step Act, which was really groundbreaking legislation that was passed in a bipartisan manner. I mean, you look at the tenure of just the tone of what's going on in Washington today. If anybody caught any of that hearing with Bill Barr today, my God, regardless of which side you're on. But last year, they passed this legislation. I want to show a clip here and then get your take on it.
Senate tonight taking bipartisan action on something substantial, overwhelmingly passing a major prison reform bill. The First Step Act eases federal sentencing for nonviolent offenders, aims to reduce repeat offending, and expands early release programs. The vote was 87-12. All the votes against the bill were by Republicans, but many Republicans voted for it. Those who voted against complained the reforms were too lenient and could allow dangerous criminals back into society prematurely. The bill was backed by the White House and negotiated with the help of Jared Kushner, President Trump's son-in-law and senior advisor. The House is expected to take up the bill on Thursday.
How significant do you think this is? By the way, one of your partners in working on this was Jared Kushner.
Jared Kushner, whose father went to prison and who fought on this as hard as that. This is history. This is history. Right now, you're witnessing history on the floor of the U.S. Senate. There's a Christmas miracle underway where, for the first time in a generation, Republicans and Democrats are arm in arm tonight saying, we are sending too many people to prison. They're coming out bitter and not better. We want to make a tremendous difference. I want to say Hakeem Jeffries on the left, Jared Kushner, and Donald Trump on the right have brought together a coalition like I've never seen. You've got literally the National Association of Manufacturers, Fox News, and Sean Hannity on the same page with Nancy Pelosi, Cory Booker, the ACLU, Cut 50. Something is beautiful is happening. And it's not that you have to see it to believe it. You have to believe it to see it. It's happening right now. People coming together in America to help the people who have nothing. And it's amazing.
This is something,
this is
something you and I can agree on. It's a great day for America. This is such an awesome issue to give, whether they're minorities or white kids, a second chance in life. It's awesome.
Bill, how significant was that bill? Bill, how significant was the bill?
It was huge, huge. And I'll tell you how it was huge. I started my career in the early 90s in federal court. And our federal correctional system mirrors, in some instances, our state system here in Pennsylvania. Our federal system is taking the lead on trying to bring some sensibility based upon all of that data that's compiled in those 20-some plus years. And what they're doing in a multidisciplinary approach is they're bringing all of the stakeholders from each point in the system, the front end, the back end, the prosecutor, the defense attorneys, the associations that represent law enforcement, the associations that represent public defenders, and the people. The people have spoken. The people do not want this form of justice that's antiquated. They want a more living, a more flexible, a more realistic sense of justice. They want their communities to be safe, but they don't want to be penalizing people that are conducting themselves in a fashion that otherwise, from some recreational uses of marijuana, shouldn't be catching these people and using taxpayer dollars, thousands of dollars in valuable resource when we could be addressing mental health issues, addiction and opioid issues. We should be talking about term limits. We should be creating opportunities within the system to show how people can benefit from that second chance. So when you don't have the same old same, and when you have the same people making the same decisions and refusing to change, I think right now that hearing in DC sets the tone for the next 10 years in terms of criminal justice at the federal level. And what we need is a parallel process at the state level with Governor Wolf and the senators and the House of Representatives, and again, all the stakeholders to get in there and roll up their sleeves and say, hey, look, the people have spoken and this is what they want. Public service in each branch of government has to be accountable to the people. It has to be for the people, and it has to be by the people. Right now, that's what's wrong. We need to have the people have a say in all of these reforms and ideas so that we don't look back 20 years from now and say, oh, well, we should have did this or we should have did that. No, we need to do it now.
You answered one of our viewers' questions. Joseph Klepek asked you that very same thing. And Adrian Sheffy says that it is about time. And I agree with you, Adrian. So, Bill, in the state of Ohio right now, they have a strategy for sentencing reforms that they call the 5 R's. Reclassify all low-level drug possession as a misdemeanor. Retroactively apply those reclassifications to include communities that have been over-targeted by past drug wars. Reform this probation to prison pipeline. Reduce sentences for prisoners who participate in the treatment programs, behavioral programs, that sort of thing, and then re-employ these prisoners by reducing the job barriers for those who have already served their time. What is your take on that strategy, Bill?
Well, I think it addresses those 6 topics that you and I discussed before the show. And what I mean by that is when they're talking about reclassifying the sentencing scheme, I'm totally on with that because I can tell you there are instances where there are nonviolent offenses where the offense gravity score is not high enough. And I can tell you where there are violent charges or offenses where the offense gravity score is too high. There has to be that what I think it was Jay-Z said, there needs to be proportionality. And so how do you get that when you're only studying abstract? No, you need to bring the real data to say, okay, let's compare apples to apples. So that's just one instance of reclassifying the penalties for all of these criminal offenses. There's too much disparity. There's too much inequity. The second thing that plays into the sentencing code or the way courts dispose of cases is when you're looking at the penalty for prior record scores. Sometimes people, again, when they commit low to risk, not too much violent crime at a young age, they're still being treated the same as somebody that committed a crime in their 30s or 40s of a more violent nature. Again, there's a lack of connectivity and common sense in fashioning how those types of offenders are punished. And when you talk about geographical diversity, when somebody commits a crime above I-80, and somebody commits the same crime, let's say in the city of Pittsburgh or Philadelphia, there's no uniformity. There's no predictability and consistency. So that's the third area of addressing how this reform movement needs to address the lack of uniformity, the lack of consistency. Hey, look, people will adjust their behavior if they're able to understand, appreciate the consequences of their actions.
Well, while we're quoting Jay-Z, he also famously said, I'm not a businessman. I'm a businessman. All right.
He is.
Yeah, he sure is. All right, let's move on. So the Supreme Court Justice of the United States, John Roberts, was asked if he could foresee a day when artificial intelligence will assist with judicial decision-making. And he replied, well, that day is already here, and it's putting a strain on how the judiciary goes about doing things. Bill, what are the pros and the cons of using big data and artificial intelligence when it comes to sentencing guidelines, and where do you stand on that issue?
Well, one, I do believe artificial intelligence is here. I also believe that it can be used for a good purpose. I also think, though, that you have to look at the underlying data in terms of its interpretability, because that's where there could be some implicit bias. There could be some implicit prejudices built into these algorithms in terms of the artificial intelligence. So again, you should not be removing the discretion of judges, but the judges should have some, again, understanding of what the basis or the underlying mechanism is for the offender. If the offender is violating terms of conditions of probation or parole because they're on an addiction, we know that relapse is a part of recovery. So it makes no sense to continue to punish them over and over again for a process that's going to allow them to get out of the system. On the flip side of that, when you're a police officer or a law enforcement officer or a prosecutor, and you're being attacked, you're being physically threatened or assaulted, then I think you have to look at that category a little bit differently. But I don't think that you have to throw the bathwater and the baby out together. I think you got to have some common sense. I think, the educational component now of judges, huge in Pennsylvania. 2 years ago, but they came up with a suggestion that now became a mandatory recommendation that all judges need continuing legal education. You would have thought that that was the standard. No, it was not. So again, I think with improved education for our judiciary, it's going to allow judges to really open their eyes and say, hey, look, I can't be throwing people in jail for, small amounts of marijuana.
Bill, going back to the last question, a viewer, Brian Bennett, wants to know, besides Jay-Z, who else has been championing this cause?
Well, locally, I can tell you professors at Duquesne University, John Rago, is very instrumental in formulating policy and lobbying for certain measures to be reformed through Lieutenant Governor Fetterman and Governor Wolf. I can also see my counterparts over at the University of Pittsburgh School of Law with David Harris and some of the professors there in the criminal justice program. They are equally trying to work to these measures. I think Jerry Dickerson was another, scholar that's weighing in on looking at redoing these, classifications of crimes, these levels of incarceration that continue to just inflict damage on the lower income inner city communities. And that's the reality of it. I mean, the system right now is doing what it's designed to do. So if the people don't want it to continue to do what it's doing by design, we need to change it. We need to reform it.
Bill, I was surprised when I saw this stat that over 6 million people cannot vote in the United States of America because of a felony conviction. What is the origin of this law? Should they be changed, Bill, and why?
Well, I've always been somebody that believes in inclusivity. I believe in not disenfranchising voters. I do believe that there should be some form of civic penalty on some individuals, but I don't think it should be a lifetime. I mean, if they, again, have reformed and modified their behavior, let's say it might be a 5-year window or a 10-year look back. If that felony now has been distanced from the current situation, I believe that the law and the policy of we the people would want those folks to now become voting members. To get back into being a productive member of society means they should enjoy all of the rights that we as people, that we fight for, that we legislate for, that we have judicial disputes and controversies. Those folks need to be able to vote again, with some proportionality. I'm not saying that everybody that has a felony should be reinstated. I think there needs to be a process, just like immigration. Not everybody that's here should be here, but if they're willing to go through the process, we need to help them. We need to lift them up. We don't need to keep kicking people when they're down. I'm totally against that. I think that's government bullying. I think it's government overreach. I think it's wasting resources that need to be reallocated for positive impacts to communities.
Bill, more than half of the prisoners in our criminal justice system suffer from some sort of mental illness, according to the Bureau of Justice. And as you know, as a result, these people are more likely to not make bail. They typically face longer sentences. They make parole less often. They cycle through the prison system for much of their lives. And sadly, they have a much higher degree of suicide rate. What can be done to better handle people in our prison system that have mental illness? Should we do anything different, and what can we do different?
Well, working from the back end, the folks that have already been incarcerated, convicted, that suffer from these degenerative conditions, there should be a task force assigned through, perhaps at the state level, the Attorney General, perhaps with some representatives from the various segments of the District Attorneys Association and our counterparts on the defense. I think they need to go into the institutions with corrections and parole and find out who may now be eligible to be diverted out of the system. Where now can we put some of these folks that are suffering? So again, if we're not going to address the back end of that change by having a component where we have facilities to put these folks in who may now be in their 50s or 60s, but certainly if they're incapacitated, they're probably of minimal to low risk at this juncture of their lives. Now, flash forward to the front side. The specialty courts that have been created in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania for various select criminal offenses and offenders, I would use the Veterans Court, a drug court, mental health court. Those specialty courts are actually screening cases now and trying to divert them. But again, the same problem faces those prosecutors, those judges, those defense lawyers. Where do we put these people? So when you build that system of corrections, and that corrections is meant to detain people, to incarcerate people, and to protect society, we have to take that step back now and say, how do we build the prisons of the future? What types of things do we want in those facilities in order for people to have some dignity, some quality of life, and so that people that are working in that environment can do what that environment must do? That must nurture the offender, it must rehabilitate and treat the offender. Otherwise, all of the prisons that we have are going to end up the same way they are right now, crowded. The facilities that I've viewed firsthand and either visiting with clients or looking, to deal with various inmates as a prosecutor, they're like 60 years old in some instances. I mean, think about it. You live in a house for 60 years and you don't take care of it. Do you want to live in that house? I mean, just because they committed a crime doesn't mean they need to be coddled. I mean, they shouldn't be looking at HD television, but it doesn't mean they should be living where there's rats, cockroaches, poor food quality, where they have to pay all this money to make phone calls for, basic necessities. I mean, don't forget, some of the previous clip that you aired talked about prisons being big business. It is huge business. And we need to put them in with some strengths.
We're gonna touch on that in a little bit. I have a question for you about community courts, but before I ask you the question, I want to show a quick clip.
The community court is more than a court because it is a place where people get help.
They really look to address the underlying factors that have caused people to be justice system involved.
What's really going on with that individual? How can we better serve them?
It gives the participant an opportunity to be in a safe space where they can have a more intimate conversation with a judge.
They are thinking with a different level of intentionality and thoughtfulness about what courts should be.
Those courts are there to see change, and change in the population, change in results, change in communities.
We can rewrite that narrative so that the role we play is a positive one, and a story of community empowerment instead of community oppression.
Bill, what exactly is a community court? Who does it benefit? And where are we with them in Pennsylvania right now?
Well, I think community courts would benefit everybody equally. As far as the organizational flow, it's the substance of the actual court business, but it's also the location of the court business. And what I've envisioned as far as what I'm looking at to reform, or the suggestions that I've made to professors, to stakeholders, to elected officials, is we need to expand, one, the jurisdictions of our magistrates. We need to make sure that our magistrates are attorneys, versed in the law. We need to hire people with skill sets of social services, psychiatric backgrounds, law enforcement, so that we look at it sort of like the old way, that tribal law, where people would sit down and just work out their differences. You don't always have to litigate, penalize, prosecute people for transgressions in the community. It's sort of a more upfront justice where, hey, look, we're going to take some of these low-level crimes, some of these low-level disputes, we're going to divert the focus on the front end, and we're going to let the community make those decisions with the judge. The judge shouldn't just be the judge that we think of from 1960, 1980. I mean, we need to progress. We need to move forward. Judges have to be unique problem solvers and be creative. So this community court system allows a judge to be more than just an umpire that calls the balls and the strikes. The judge can be a leader, can be a healer, can be a producer of solid decision-making, thinking about it from outside the box, but giving that oversight over that magisterial expanded jurisdiction. So that would be one way to have the courts look at it from a community standpoint. And again, that would modernize and progressively change the face of our legal system, because it's well overdue. I mean, what do we have to lose? I mean, all we're going to do is continue to incarcerate people that want to make a change. Maybe they acted out because they were desperate. Maybe they acted out because they panicked. Well, that person might never act out again. But if we put them in a system that's designed to keep them there, to violate them on probation because they can't make their payments, then how are we saying that that's true social justice? That's an inequitable system on its face, and it needs to change. I mean, we're smarter now. Think about it like this, Doc. I was watching that movie Concussion. That doesn't mean, when you're a parent now, or you're a coach, or you're an athletic director, or you're a neurosurgeon, or you're an aspiring football player, that you stop playing football. You just look at it and how do you play the sport to be safer, to be smarter about it, and using all of that information, all of those guides. Tackling techniques will change, but that doesn't mean you quit the game. The game's going to go on. Our justice system needs to go on. It just can't go backwards. It needs to move forward. Community courts allow us to move forward.
In America, poor people that cannot afford legal representation are often appointed public defenders. And in theory, it sounds great that they're appointed representation, but too often their reality is awful. These attorneys are typically the most overworked, underfunded, underpaid lawyers. Their hearts start out in the right place, but the sheer magnitude of their workload and of what they face and the lack of resources they have on a daily basis all too often means that poor people are not getting the legal representation that they deserve. And my old friend, Jonathan Rapping, has dedicated his professional life to changing that through this organization called Gideon's Promise, whose mission it is to transform the criminal justice system by building a movement of public defenders who provide equal justice for marginalized communities. Rap, as we call him, as everybody who grew up with Jonathan Rapping calls him, Rap. He not only wrote a book about it, but HBO did an entire documentary on the subject a few years ago, where they followed 3 young public defenders who dedicated their lives to helping people that society would like to forget. And I want to show a quick clip of my friend Rapp talking about one critical element of this mission.
And I want to just emphasize that proximity is more than just getting spatially close to another person. Our courtrooms are filled with judges and prosecutors and probation officers who are spatially close to people they are processing into cells for intolerable amounts of time. Proximity is more than just standing near someone. It's getting to know someone. It's getting to understand who they are. It's getting to understand what they want out of life. It's learning the skills to tell their story. It is making other people not just get near those impacted by their decisions, but truly understand those impacted by their decisions. In our criminal justice system, we quite literally can't do that without public defenders. They are the vehicle that forces us to get proximate to people whose lives are otherwise being thrown away.
Bill, do you know my friend Rappin? Are you familiar with Gideon's Promise?
He looked familiar, but I'm not going to say that I would know him like I know you.
Okay. All right, great. Based on the sentiment, though, of his organization, what is being done locally here to kind of fulfill that same mission?
Well, I think that, one, our county has an obligation for the public defender's office. And, you know, where those funds are in terms of an overall budget, certainly they could use a little bit more monies. Are there monies available if they go for it? In other words, to approve some type of grant program funding, some type of a special foundation funding. I'm understanding now that there has been an appeal made by the county to fund certain projects like the district attorney's been doing for years with victims of crime, with domestic violence. So now on the flip side, our defenders associations, our defenders programs are trying to reach out for those types of funds. And it could be even these celebrities that are allowing, you know, based upon certain criteria and eligibility. Hey, look, we need to run a first-class public defender's office. We need investigators. We need experts. We need former prosecutors. We need people that have studied offenders, you know, with parole and probation guidelines in mind. We need specialists. So just as the prosecution and the courts have created all these specialty functions, we need the same level of an army on the defense. The defense should never be resting. The defense should always be questioning. The defense has a right to challenge authority. I'll give you an example. Many times prosecutors will have these plea agreements that, you know, they sound like they're a good deal, but at the end of the day, that may only be the iceberg above the water. The iceberg below the water is if you go to trial and roll the dice, you're going to get crushed by the judge when it comes to sentencing. They can bring in all this other relevant conduct. They can bring in these sentencing enhancements. They can bring in mandatory minimums depending upon how they charge the cases. So again, that's part of the problem. And the defender can only do so much to challenge or defend against all of those inequities, especially if you have prosecutors that aren't in tow with all of the commonalities of life and life's experience.
Bill, Brian Bennett has a question. He wants to know, how do you see the part that police play in all of this?
I think police need to be able to do their job. I think that part of the problem is these prosecutors are micromanaging them. They're challenging the authority of the police when the police may want to give somebody a second chance. I've had cases this past week where the police did not want to prosecute, but the prosecutor wanted to prosecute. I used to do that all the time where we would, under Bob Colville, if the police officer feels this person is entitled to a second chance, the police officer has that discretion. Let the police officer do their job. They know their communities. So again, unless we're going to start pulling prosecutors and have a parallel operation with the local law enforcement where they get to see the case from the get-go rather than on the back end, then maybe they can talk more intelligently on how they would formulate the charge, the penalty, and what's the appropriate disposition. Otherwise, the police can do their job.
In a related matter, what is your take on defunding the police?
Well, I think the police need assistance of a specialty nature as well. So I'm not so sure that they need less money. I think they need more money because they need to have the expertise of people with a psychiatric background to deal with kids that might be on the spectrum. They also need to be able to take people to a mental health 302 process. A lot of those resources for smaller law departments, police departments in Western Pennsylvania, they're already too much work on their plate. They can't concentrate on what they were actually trained to do. So by hiring these civilian experts to work alongside of them, to maybe even bring the public defender lawyers out into the police departments as well and create this sort of integrity unit where you're getting two sets of opinions to focus on the same problem from different perspectives, then they'll get it right. we're not going to be wasting our time down the road. We can free up all of that extra money and, again, use those savings to create other opportunities for people to get clean slates and second chances.
All right, Bill, I started a new segment on the show last Thursday, and you are going to be the second. I don't want to call you a victim of it. You're going to be the second contestant on it, right? It's called Quarantine Quick Takes. And I'm going to ask you some impossibly complex questions, and I'm looking for you to give our viewers short and sweet answers, not to put you on the spot or anything like that. Cool? All right, let's do it. All right. Bill, can you tell our audience an example when each of the following 4 forms of judicial punishment should be enacted: rehabilitation, retribution, deterrence, and incapacitation?
Those factors apply to every case. It's just a matter of difference of degree based upon the severity of the offense, the background of the actor, and the harm to society. So if you're trying to deter something like marijuana, you certainly wouldn't want to have people incarcerated. You certainly don't need to really deter them. I think you need to think about maybe some contribution to society like community service or some form of a restorative balanced justice where they pay a fine. Maybe it's even a parallel system like a civil fine. So you don't even have to bring it into the criminal system. You can have a parallel civil process where it's just an administrative penalty and you move on. And those monies then could go to fund the defense.
So to follow up on that, if you're a judge, what are the factors that you're looking at to decide whether you need to send someone to prison or whether you want to try to rehab them in another manner? What are these things that judges look at for those of us that are not in that world?
Well, the sentencing code is one set of criteria, and they're guided by these combinations or matrices of certain levels of offenses that then give the judge various options or alternatives in the form of fashioning an appropriate sentence or sanction. It could start on the low level to where a person just basically gets a first-time program where if they complete that program within a 6 or 9 month period of time, they can get their whole charge, their whole case dismissed, and then they can get the record expunged. On the high end, when you're talking about major crimes of violence against individuals, whether they're sex offense cases, whether they're home invasion, whether they're shootings and assaults. I mean, then you're talking about individuals that potentially could harm society. They could harm themselves as well. So there's a higher or a heightened aspect of incarceration or deterrence when you're dealing with people that are more prone to violence. Maybe they're using guns in terms of their modus operandi. Maybe they've already been convicted of 2 or 3 prior felonies involving crimes against people. So again, it's a range and it's a process, and it's better in my view, having looked at this from all perspectives in 27 years, that we need to get it right from that first initial entry into the system. If we wait to go back now and bring all these people that have already gone through 6, 7, maybe 8 different prosecutions and convictions, and we're going to leave it in the hands of an authority like the parole board, well, where are we going to put these people once we do let them out, maybe on a compassionate release? Let's say if they're over 65 or 68 years of age, they're of poor health, they've already, served 20 years, just using those types of factors that need to be, mentioned in the discussion, those should be the options now. I mean, why not? Why not?
Bill, 1 in every 100 people in the United States of America are currently incarcerated. Why does the USA imprison more people than any other nation in the world?
Well, it's a flawed system based upon potentially the money aspect. I mean, there's financial incentives for people to be put in jail. That was the whole problem with the juvenile justice system in Luzerne County, where all these kids that should have been placed on probation or home confinement with their parents were being transported into these facilities because, unbeknownst to people until the federal prosecutor stepped in, the judges had a nice little deal with the owners of those facilities.
Which brings me to the next question. And that is that, most Democrats say that private companies should not profit from the incarcerated, while many conservatives say, why not if private prisons can do it better and more economically? So can you expound a little bit on your thoughts on the business of prison?
I would say we need to turn it more into a hybrid system. I feel that many times I could be a court-appointed lawyer, for example, or a conflict counsel, where I'm not being retained for my private services, but yet all of my expertise being a private lawyer benefits that particular client that could not otherwise afford me. So in that instance, I'm a hybrid. I'm sort of being that private expert that comes in to perform a public service. And I think it ends for a good, positive outcome for the client, because then you can take on a one-on-one relationship. Our prison system should not be purely public, but it should not be privatized. I think that the happy medium of allowing the public to then compete for expertise in the private sector to improve the public version of delivering incarceration or correctional services. So I feel that that would also keep some cost and sensibility amongst the burdens on tax dollars to our citizens. If we continue to write blank checks to privatize these institutions for incarceration's sake, we're going to lose out as citizens. We have no control over those dollars. On the other hand, if we don't get the expertise to deal with mental health issues, medical issues, aging issues like rheumatoid arthritis, dementia, renal or organ failure, how is the public setup going to make a difference for those particular individuals? It's not. We need to bring those people in from the private sector to afford those services.
Bill, cybercrime is approaching a $5 billion a year. It's really hard to put a number on it, but those are the estimates, $5+ billion a year. What can our justice system do to kind of stem this somewhat recent phenomenon of cyber criminals?
Well, the pendulum switches back and forth, Doc. Many times when I was in the Attorney General's office, targeting white collar computer type crimes on the internet, we would coordinate the parallel work with our federal counterparts at the U.S. Attorney's Office. In many instances, you would look at, for instance, the target being tax dollars. Well, you have the U.S. Treasury on the one hand, and you have the Department of Revenue in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. If individuals have the notion and the ingenuity to commit fraud of income tax fraud or refund fraud by stealing identities, then you have to make a decision. If the U.S. Treasury farmed out X number of dollars and the state only, compares a lower amount, then you'd want the federal prosecutors to deal with that type of white collar fraud because, one, they have more resources and personnel, and two, the penalties are a lot more significant. So people that then get caught up in that system, in the federal system, are going to be handled with a little bit more seriously. It would serve as a deterrent per se. Now, on the state side of things, like right now, for instance, crises, pandemic, they're rife with fraud. Every time you go online for the payroll protection or for unemployment compensation, you have those big disclaimers about fraud, about individuals that are now utilizing, let's say, people that are off the grid, maybe deceased individuals. They have their personal information. They're using debit cards to then apply for these loans, or they're applying for unemployment benefits. Well, they're in jail. They haven't even worked in years. So again, people are creating these bust out schemes because, think about it, the government prints money. That means the government has the money it prints. So therefore, you're not targeting somebody, and it's a what if they have money to be of value to the criminal. The criminal knows that the money's there, so they're going to target the government as an offender. That's what they're going to do.
All right, as we wind it down here, Bill, I want to end with a very controversial topic and get your take on it. Capital punishment is legal in 28 of our 50 states. 34 people in America were sentenced to death in 2019. 22 people were actually executed in 2019. So my questions to you, Bill, are, does the death penalty actually prevent crime? And do you think it is another tool in the judicial toolbox, or do you think the death penalty should be outlawed?
I think that's a matter for our legislature. I think our governor has had a moratorium on it locally in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. I also know that the combination of drugs that are used under Pennsylvania law to execute individuals are no longer available. So as a practical standpoint, the death penalty is not working the way that it was designed when it was approved. So I definitely think we need to have that discussion as part of the overall discussion on criminal justice reform. I'm also of the mindset that we need to shrink the level of categories or types of crimes that would allow us to even have that consideration of an option, the death penalty. So again, I think that prosecutors have a lot of flexibility and a lot of categories where they can throw people into that capital case, where I really think that all the analytics, all the data, all the research would say we need to shrink that pool. And I could think of one primary example. If you have a police officer that is, killed and fatally, his life's taken or her life's taken in performing their duties, and it was an unprovoked situation, and there were no other circumstances that would be mitigating circumstances, then I could think of that instance still being sort of the way to implement any type of modified capital offense. On the other hand, I do feel that a lot of these other cases that are fitting into that category currently need to be adjusted or removed from consideration. I think that would save a lot of tax dollars. I think we would think about being smart on crime as well as tough on crime. And I think that would still be consistent with the movement in all these other states where they're either drastically reducing or eliminating the death penalty.
Yeah, I definitely think that, obviously it's punitive. Is it a deterrent to crime? I'm not a criminal, so I don't think like a criminal. I'm not sure, but I'm led to believe it's probably not. So,
right.
Hey, Bill, this has been incredibly informative, man. I learned a lot, and I appreciate it. And hopefully I don't get myself in any legal jeopardy, but if I do, I know where to turn. Bill, where can our viewers find you?
Well, I have a website at williamkayelaw.com. My text and phone number is 412-953-7022. And, I'm there. I'm on the social media. I'm on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn. Very accessible to my clients. Again, I don't take all the cases that come through the door or that call, but I try to be fair. And fundamentally, I want to help people. I want to give people that right that they deserve of zealous representation. I want to be fair. I want the prosecutors and the judges to treat these clients with some respect and keep it all in perspective.
And you are truly, and it shows through, Bill. You've been a great guest. I appreciate you coming on the show. I learned a lot. I'm going to ask that you step into the virtual green room. Don't hang up. I want to talk to you after the show, okay?
Absolutely. Thanks, Doc.
Oh, man, thank you. All right, I just want to give a quick plug for what we got going on here on Thursday. Just prior to tonight's show, I have confirmed that Thursday night we have cyber dating expert Julie Spira on the program. She has been featured in about 1,500 national articles. She's been on every network across the country. She's a best-selling author. My God, in the age of COVID, people are looking for love in all the wrong places. I'm a married man. What the hell do I know? But if you're looking for love out there and you need a little bit of education as to what direction to head to Thursday night, you want to hang out with me and check out the program and check out Julie Spira. As always, you guys have been awesome. Thanks again to our guest tonight, Billy Caye, and I will see you guys on Thursday. Peace.